UFOs, unidentified flying objects, one of the most controversial subjects of all time. As we enter the 21st century, a growing body of evidence suggests that Earth is being visited by advanced non-human life and that the public is not being told the truth. Many now believe that our own government has covered up the truth about UFOs for over 50 years. Today, new voices are starting to emerge. Voices that until recently have kept silent. These are the voices of those who have worked inside our government and the military.
The intent of destroying those documents, and I charge the Air Force with this now, and the small nucleus within the intelligence community, I charge them with destroying those documents to keep the people who were investigating what happened here at Roswell from becoming public.
Sergeant Clifford Stone served for 22 years in the United States Army. During that time, he claims to have been a part of an elite top-secret unit charged with recovering crashed UFOs and communicating with their occupants. Since his retirement in 1990, Sergeant Stone has amassed one of the largest collections of legitimate government documents suggesting not only that some UFOs may be extraterrestrial craft, but that our government has continuously lied to us.
The reason I'm trying to get information out concerning UFOs and the reality that UFOs do exist and our government knows about it, very simply put, is that government never has the right to lie to the people. Government has a moral obligation to tell the American people the truth and tell them as much as they can. I, being in the military at one time, I have a keen understanding that there are certain things that you have to keep secret, even from your people, or even from your own people, in order to ensure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. When it comes to UFOs, this isn't the case. We are doing a much larger moral wrong by keeping the information classified, as opposed to a moral good to protect us from ourselves. There are many, many people who in everyday walk of life have UFO experiences. Some of these are sometimes no more dramatic than seeing a UFO sailing across the sky, a dish-shaped object, a cigar-shaped object. Yet it has an impact on these people. A lot of these people won't talk because they have a fear of ridicule. Other people have seen UFOs that have landed. They have seen the physical traces left by those UFOs. Other people have had actual interaction with our visitors, the intelligence behind the phenomena itself. Many of these people have suffered the losses of having their families split up simply because people don't believe them. They wind up having psychological problems. They lose their jobs. They become isolated from society. And not through any fault of their own, simply because they had a UFO experience. I feel that government has an obligation to these people to let the world know that they are not alone, that these things do happen, and that we do know about it, and that our government is well aware that these events take place. Government has a moral obligation to tell the truth, what it knows about UFOs. And this is what I hope to accomplish by bringing out documentation and telling my story.
Sergeant Clifford Stone began acquiring government UFO documents at the age of 15 in the mid-1960s. With the resurgence of the Freedom of Information Act in the early 70s, he was able to win the release of material from several agencies, including ones that have denied ever having information about UFOs. According to Sergeant Stone, anybody who knows where to look and how to ask the right questions can eventually prove that our government has maintained a deep involvement with UFOs while keeping it a secret for decades.
I've been gathering U.S. government-related UFO documents for approximately 35 years. Prior to the advent of the Freedom of Information Act 1974, I'd simply write to a government agency asking for information on what they had dealing with UFOs. With most agencies outside of the Air Force, I would get a total denial of any involvement in the UFO field. with the advent of the Freedom of Information Act, I found that it could be a very useful tool if you used it correctly. The way I used it, I'd never just pick one agency to ask for the same information. I'd use what in the field we call the shotgun effect. I'd write to 10, 15 different agencies asking for exactly the same information. I would get some denials that some agencies, for example, the Air Force had no information on this particular incident or event that I was asking for information on. I'd get a document from the FBI saying that they did have information, plus I'd get the information the FBI had. I would then go back, armed now with the documentation from other agencies, to the agencies that stated that they had no information, and I'd confront them with the documentation from other government agencies showing that they did in fact have information. Sometimes I'd get information back from the agency that was in denial, alluding to the fact that other agencies who sent me stuff actually had more material, and armed with that information, I'd go back to them. But it's always more effective if you use the shotgun effect. If you ask several agencies, the more the better, that you know would have information that would be involved. If you ask them, you get a wider response, and you also get ammunition to go into those agencies that initially send you the denial, and you can hit pay dirt by doing it this way. It also helps to know which agencies to go to. It also helps to know what words to use and what regulations and what, should I say, buttons to punch.
Not all documents that look authentic are legitimate. In the field of UFO research, there has been many hoaxes that have made it difficult to establish what the government really knows. Sergeant Stone has taken great pains to weed out phony documents from the real ones.
When we view a document, we make every effort to make sure that we get it from a legitimate government source, the CIA, the NSA, the Air Force, the Defense Intelligence Agency. Once we get it from them, then we know that it is in fact a legitimate document. Also, we look at the markings on the documents. There are clear, precise ways in which a government document is properly classified. The markings on those documents haven't changed very much over the years. They used to have maybe as many as 11, 15 different classifications. At present time, there's only 3 recognized classifications of government documents, that being confidential, secret, and top secret. Of course, you can have other markings identifying those documents as being SCI, sensitive compartmented information under SAP's special access programs. But we do have guidelines, Department of Defense guidelines, and individual service guidelines that actually show us what to be looking for in a properly classified document. We also have guidelines that show us what to look for in those documents that have been legitimately released by the United States government and U.S. government agencies.
Without breaking any laws and without relying upon material from shadowy informants, Sergeant Stone has been able to piece together a hidden history of U.S. government involvement with the UFO subject for more than half a century.
All documents that you will see in this program are government documents. They were all obtained legally. You're not going to find any documents that allege to be classified documents that was snuck out from some military facility or from some deep dark vault. Even if I had access to such a document, I would not disclose it until it was properly released. I would fight to get its release. But the important thing to know is that these are government documents. These are documents that have in fact been legally obtained through either the Freedom of Information Act or through the aid and assistance of various members of Congress.
The modern UFO era officially began on June 24, 1947, when private pilot Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 crescent-shaped objects flying in formation along the slopes of Mount Rainier in Washington state. When he landed and filed his report, a newspaper reporter coined the phrase "flying saucers" to describe what Arnold had seen. But that was really not the beginning. For weeks prior to this event, the American public had witnessed an increasing number of strange objects in the sky. It actually all began during World War II, where Allied and Axis pilots alike reported seeing what became known as Foo Fighters, or disc-shaped objects that followed and outmaneuvered their warplanes. Each side thought the Foo Fighters were the other side's secret weapons. It was at this point that our government began to quietly investigate UFOs, and little known to the public, by 1943 they had already come to some startling conclusions.
We recognize June 24th, 1947 as the day in which the modern UFO era began. Actually, it was long before that. The United States intelligence community was not telling the American people about their concern about the Foo Fighters during the Second World War, beyond the concern that they may be some new device of the Axis powers. When there was an outbreak in 1946 of UFOs in Europe, particularly in Sweden, they called them ghost rockets at that time, once again the American public wasn't to learn too much about what was going on there. There was a great desire to find out. The United States Army, under the auspices of General MacArthur, created what was known as the United States Army Interplanetary Phenomena Research Unit. In 1943, MacArthur was able to ascertain from his CIC people that definitely there were interplanetary craft visiting our planet that was observing that world event at that time we called the Second World War. And if that they proved to be hostile, we would have a great dilemma. This fact that I've just told you has never been made public to the American people. They know of the Interplanetary Phenomena Research Unit, but they don't know actually when it began.
Beginning in 1946 and continuing on through 1948, the U.S. military conducted extensive research into the UFO dilemma. Most of this research was done in secret. If the public was informed at all, it was done in a way to deflect growing popular concern while allowing authorities to obtain high-caliber reports from credible witnesses. Those reports of substance were drawn from the testimony of military and civilian pilots, radar operators, law enforcement officials, and scientists. Then, in January of 1948, the Air Force launched its first acknowledged UFO investigation.
With the large number of UFO reports coming into the U.S. Air Force, it was seen that there was a necessity to have a clearinghouse, if you wish, to receive UFO reports and give some contention that they were getting official notice. The Air Force then set up what was called Project Sign. Project Sign came into existence January 22nd, 1948. The press would refer to it as Project Saucer. This was to protect the code name, Sign, from the American public as the code name itself was classified. In February 1949, the report was released on Project Sign stipulating that all UFOs could be explained away by hoaxes, illusions, or misidentification of known phenomena or aircraft seen under unusual conditions. The Air Force released this report knowing fully well that it was incorrect. This did not stop the influx of reports coming in to the U.S. Air Force dealing with UFOs. Getting all these reports, they were finally forced to acknowledge that Project Sign did not die in February 1949, but that it continued. The name had been changed by virtue of Sign being compromised. They changed it to Project Grudge. Thus it would remain Project Grudge until 1952, at which time it was then identified as Project Blue Book. It would continue as Project Blue Book until its demise in December 1969. What was unknown to the American public was that behind the scenes there was a much more broader investigation of UFOs dealing with more reliable sightings, the military sightings, the sightings that was being reported by astronomers, the sightings that was being reported by scientists.
Initially, Project Sign investigated UFOs from the standpoint that they may actually represent interplanetary spacecraft. But shortly thereafter, the project was terminated. The Air Force then adopted an extremely skeptical approach to the UFO dilemma, preferring to explain away as many cases as it could. Although provocative sightings from credible witnesses continued to flood into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book that followed them downplayed their significance to the public. The truly sensitive military investigations continued, hidden from public scrutiny.
We know also from the release of documents from the FBI that Blue Book was never in charge of anything. Very quietly, behind the scenes, from the beginning, from 1947 to 1953, January of 1953 to be precise, OSI, Office of Special Investigations, those elite people who came over from the Army CIC, who were doing the initial investigations, were the ones that were in fact monitoring the UFO situation there at Wright-Patterson. Blue Book would get watered down reports, particularly of the really good, significant reports. In January 1953, a unique event took place. The United States Air Force created a very elite unit. This unit would be known as the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron. General Burgess suggested to Captain Ruppelt that they had a unit, a very unique unit, that was specifically designed to go out and do field investigations. That if this unit was permitted to do the UFO investigations, we would finally be able to get to some pay dirt. The 4602nd had a wartime mission. The wartime mission was the field exploitation of downed enemy aircraft and personnel and the exploitation of enemy documents. It had no peacetime mission. Now, at its conception, it now had a peacetime mission. That peacetime mission was to do the field investigations of unidentified flying objects, to interact with those investigations of military personnel, of highly trained observers such as scientists, astronomers, personnel who were considered highly credible observers, who knew what they were talking about as far as giving accurate data in the observations they made. They also created a new program, unknown to Project Blue Book. Every UFO report going in to the Air Material Command, later to be called the Air Tactical Intelligence Center, first went through a clearinghouse. Operation Blue Fly was now in full operation.
On December 17, 1969, the Air Force announced the closure of Project Blue Book. After more than 20 years of publicly acknowledged research, the Air Force was permanently getting out of the UFO subject. This was done at the recommendation of an Air Force Commission study by the University of Colorado, which suggested that not enough solid evidence existed to warrant continuing investigations. Yet documents obtained by Sergeant Clifford Stone now show that the military continued to study UFOs even after Blue Book closed its doors. A project called Operation Blue Fly played a key role in the government's ongoing secret UFO investigations.
The intent of Operation Blue Fly was the immediate field exploitation and recovery of any enemy or presumed enemy craft that went down in the continental United States or friendly territories overseas, as well as the field exploitation and recovery of advanced technologies. This included the recovery and field exploitation of those items which we called unidentified flying objects.
Despite official denials that the military has ever recovered crashed UFOs, Sergeant Stone has been able to verify through the Freedom of Information Act that Operation Blue Fly did exist, and that aspects of its mission involved the recovery of unidentified flying objects. These projects appear to have been part of a hidden technology recovery and exploitation program. Sergeant Stone's research has gone even further, establishing a connection to what is probably the best known and most controversial UFO case in modern history.
In 1987, the Air Force was to acknowledge that that Operation Blue Fly had, in fact, had its name changed. Moondust, also, which was the overall field exploitation, also had its name changed. When we finally got Congress to ask about these two specific projects, even though I had them under appeal, which means by law the classified documentation had to run the gauntlet of the appeal action, that they were not to be destroyed, they were not to be done away with, but as virtue of Congress asking the hard questions, what about these files as they pertain to UFOs, the Air Force was to come back and state that all their documentation on these particular operation and project, Operation Blue Fly, Project Moondust, had been destroyed. The intent of destroying those documents, and I charge the Air Force with this now, and the small nucleus within the intelligence community, I charge them with destroying those documents to keep the people who were investigating what happened here at Roswell from becoming public.
It is July 8th, 1947, and we interrupt this program with a special news report. The many rumors regarding the flying discs became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc.
Roswell, New Mexico, for a half-century now, synonymous with the mystery of a supposed crashed flying saucer and government cover-up.
We're confident once the report is out and digested by the public that this will be the final word on the Roswell incident. Bodies observed in the New Mexico desert were probably test dummies that were carried aloft by U.S. Air Force high-altitude balloons for scientific research.
Roswell, New Mexico, a name now emblazoned into our cultural memory. UFO investigators claim that in the summer of 1947, one or more UFOs crashed outside of this small town to be retrieved by the Army Air Force. The military recovery operation was supposedly hushed up for more than 30 years before researchers began to discover eyewitnesses. This event was allegedly the start of a major cover-up that continues today. Sergeant Clifford Stone claims to have found evidence that Roswell was the scene of a UFO crash, this despite ongoing denials from the Air Force. Denials that are issued with as much force today as they were more than half a century ago.
Within those documents, you would learn of U.S. Air Force Detachment 35. You would learn that the U.S. Air Force Detachment 35 collected data, pictures, reports, photographs, physical evidence. That in 1947, that information was gathered. Sometime between 1947 and 1952, those files were transferred to Detachment 35. In short, Roswell was the scene of at least 2, possibly more, UFO crashes. Those crashes were not of Project Mogul or weather balloons.
When the Pentagon was confronted by Sergeant Stone's Freedom of Information Act requests, they denied that Projects Blue Fly and Moondust ever existed. At this point, Clifford Stone enlisted the aid of Congress.
I'm not trying to solve, and I doubt that so many years later it's possible to completely solve the question of exactly what happened in Roswell. But at the very least, if there's any government records on the subject, the public is entitled to see them.
In 1993, after having received numerous requests from constituents, a member of Congress from New Mexico launched an investigation of the Roswell incident. This was the first time in nearly half a century that a public official decided to press for answers. Armed with documentation presented to him by Sergeant Clifford Stone, Congressman Stephen Schiff asked the Pentagon for a paper trail showing what really happened near Roswell during 1947. In his own words, the late Congressman Stephen Schiff was given a runaround.
I wrote a letter to the Secretary of Defense asking for an explanation, and I have to say that we in Congress do this routinely several times a week. In other words, we'll get requests for information from citizens. We'll go to the appropriate government agency, we'll get an answer, and we'll send it back to the constituent. And frankly, it's all very routine, and that's what I thought this was going to be. I have to say I can think of no other incident where I've tried to get information and got a response that in fact was a runaround. So I'd have to say this was certainly unusual. I don't know what a runaround means. I don't know whether it means the individuals involved just aren't interested in the subject, or there's something they'd prefer not to talk about.
The Air Force had in its possession in 1995, when Schiff himself was asking for the information as to what happened here, and they were lied to, as was the General Accounting Service, that they didn't have any documents. They had a complete file folder. We have the cover of the listing of those projects that Detachment 35 was involved in. Roswell was one of them. Clearly indicating that they had the file. I personally have seen some of that information. What happened in July 1947 here in Roswell was in fact the crash of 2 or more unidentified flying objects, which later were not to be unidentified. We positively confirmed that they were interplanetary craft from some other place within our within our galaxy. They did not originate in our solar system, complete with bodies.
When Congressman Stephen Schiff asked the General Accounting Office to look into the Roswell matter, the Air Force told the GAO that its records for that time period were destroyed long ago. Sergeant Stone argues that the complete documents must still exist, hidden by an intricate web of invisible special access projects.
I believe that in the General Accounting Office report, one of the most interesting things that I learned, once again going back to what I have stated earlier about moondust and blue fly and those documents being destroyed, was how ironic historical documents that should have been maintained for prosperity, should never have been destroyed, were destroyed. Those documents that would have told us once and for all what really happened here in Roswell, the Air Force maintained had been destroyed. Once again, I have to word it this way. I would suggest that they were not destroyed. You do not destroy the Holy Grail. I would suggest that they were removed to another location to be buried deep within that which we call SCI or SAP, Special Access Programs, that they are not meant at this time to ever see the light of day. How do you cover up UFOs? You don't. We know about them. You don't go ahead and say they don't exist when people see them all the time. You state, well, we no longer investigate.
What about other UFO crashes? From his work verifying Operation Blue Fly and Project Moondust, Sergeant Stone has been able to show that a number of UFO crash retrievals have taken place around the world since 1947, and that the U.S. military was probably deeply involved with a number of them.
It would be impossible to ascertain how many actual crashes have occurred since, say, 1947. Crashes of these types of craft would be relatively rare. However, we would go out and we would extract any type of physical evidence left behind by, say, a landing. Even their trash we'd be interested in. Since there's no actual records that's come forth that gives us a full indication how many of these events may have occurred. Once again, I'd reiterate that it would be impossible to ascertain how many. However, during the course of Project Moondust and Operation Blue Fly, we have documentation that clearly indicate that there were objects of unknown origin that was recovered, that where these objects went and what happened to them after their recovery, we have no idea. Now, not all of these were whole craft. Once again, there were debris. These debris were never identified as being part of some of our space junk that re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and survived re-entry. There is also no evidence that they belonged to any other country on the face of this globe. We do know that these objects were in fact recovered and wound up in the possession of the U.S. government. Where they are now, we can only speculate. Where are the documents that clearly show what they are? We can only speculate. Where's the document on the event that happened at Kecksburg? We have no idea. Brazil had a UFO, and they referred to it as being a UFO crash. We have documents alluding to U.S. government interest in that particular event. But then the paper trail grows cold. We cannot find, once again alluding to the finalized intelligence product that clearly shows what these objects were.
Locating the most important government UFO documents has not been easy. Sergeant Stone has spent decades reconstructing the story of the military's involvement with UFOs. Bits and pieces have surfaced over the years, but the complete picture remains elusive. According to Sergeant Stone, the military and the intelligence community have worked together to keep the information fragmented. What is needed to clinch it are finalized intelligence reports.
Within the body of government documentation we have dealing with UFOs currently, we do have smoking guns, if people know what to look for. That smoking gun is this. We can readily identify and can be readily proven that for the most part what we have gathered is nothing more than what we call in the intelligence community raw intelligence field data. This raw intelligence field data must be sent and be processed into what we call a finalized intelligence product. That product then is disseminated to customers within the field who can put it to practical use in their involvement with the UFO phenomena. What's missing in this case is in fact the finalized raw intelligence documentation. Those few pieces that have surfaced, for example, Air Intelligence Report 203, dated December 10th, 1948, is what we would call a finalized intelligence product. It made recommendations and conclusions. The conclusion, by the way, was in fact that UFOs were real. They were real craft under intelligent control. But of course, they already knew that the estimate of the situation had been rejected, or would be rejected, because the estimate of the situation that the Air Force did also on 48 concluded UFOs was interplanetary, and it was ordered destroyed. In this instance, Air Intelligence Report 203 was also ordered destroyed. However, one copy was retained for historical references. That's why we have it today. And it did conclude that there was an advanced technology, possibly 20 years ahead of us, and that technology could in fact be of Russian origin. I know personally this is not the case, but in the intelligence community the only important thing was to convince the higher-ups, the powers that be, that UFOs were a reality, that they were under intelligent control, and that they did in fact represent a technology beyond our present capability.
Most people think that the Air Force and possibly other branches of the armed forces would hold primary responsibility for investigating UFO crashes and related events. But according to Sergeant Stone, the sections of the government most likely to receive comprehensive reports are civilian, the alphabet soup of low-profile intelligence agencies that keep their activities well hidden.
The branches of the U.S. government that would be more involved with UFOs than the other agencies would in fact be your civilian intelligence communities. That would be like the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency. These would be the people that would probably most likely be recipients of the finalized intelligence product and would most likely be more involved in using that finalized intelligence product. They would be, in all probability, the customers. I would like to make it clear here that those agencies would have but small nucleuses. The fewer the people that know a secret, the better the secret can be maintained.
Persistent reports of UFOs, unidentified flying objects.
For more than half a century, UFOs and ETs have been the subject of speculation, fiction, and entertainment. Perhaps no question touches us deeper than, are we alone in the universe? Sergeant Stone and other researchers claim that our government has apparently known the answer for over 50 years. If this is true, how is it that such a remarkable secret could have been kept? Slowly, investigators have been able to piece together a picture of how tightly controlled, covert military projects have managed the UFO subject, keeping the most convincing evidence away from the public. If we accept that the secrecy has been real, the next question is, why? Sergeant Clifford Stone has taken a long, hard look at the reasons.
Had the United States not imposed the secrecy that it imposed approximately 50 years ago dealing with unidentified flying objects and our knowledge of these objects and our knowledge of our visitors, we would probably be much more technologically advanced than we are right now. The reason for this is that there would be a whole lot of technological acquisition that we would have made as a result of the peoples of the world looking for it. But the one problem that we do run into, and the one problem that we need to understand, is the greed of man. Who would have acquired this technology? Would it have been the U.S.? And to what purpose? Would we have used it for the benefit of the people of Earth? Would we have used it for, let's say, advances in medicine, advances in mode of transportation, advances in new fuels, fuels that might be much more cheaper than, say, oil? Or would we have used it for military means to go ahead and project our military might? What if some other country acquired that technology because of us acknowledging that UFOs were a reality and that there was, in fact, an advanced race? Would the Soviet Union, would a communist state have used it for the betterment of its people, the betterment of the world? Or would they too have utilized it for military application and used it to impose their will on a free society such as our own? All we can do is speculate. But once again, I'll have to reiterate, as in anything when it comes with national security and being open with the public, one of the first most crucial things you must do is weigh what you have got to gain by what you have got to lose. In this instance, had they been open at that time and told the world UFOs are a reality, there would have been a major effort by all countries to acquire that technology. And should it have fallen into the wrong hands, the world could be worse off than what we are today.
UFOs were clearly noticed by our military during and immediately after World War II. In the years that followed, nuclear weapons and the Cold War would dominate the attention of government planners concerned with preventing disaster and maintaining global security. In a world on the verge of self-destruction, telling the truth was considered far too dangerous. Looking back over half a century of denial, Sergeant Clifford Stone has contemplated what we have lost and what we stand to gain by telling the truth today. today.
It's often asked, what have we been denied historically by the secrecy that surrounds the UFO phenomena? Well, to that I can only state this. In history, we study about ancient civilizations. We also study about our early history. Hopefully, we learn from these lessons of early history and ancient civilizations, and we grow from that type of knowledge. Well, in this instance, we have been denied the full truth that there are other civilizations out there in space, that those civilizations are visiting us, what their cultures are like, how do they differ from us, how are they like us. These are all things that some historian in the future will be addressing, because UFOs are here. They are, in fact, piloted by different species within our own universe. So we're being denied this type of knowledge. We are being denied exposure to this type of knowledge, which I don't think would hurt us, but it would make us grow. It would make us grow spiritually. I don't think it would have the damning effect that a lot of people think it would have should it come out. The scientific community would be hurt because they'd have to go back to school, because their science, their understanding of physics is different from what our understanding of physics is. Organized religion, I don't think that would even be damaged. It wouldn't shake my belief in God. I would continue to believe in God. I'd continue to pray. I would continue to be a Catholic. If we go ahead and we deny reality, we are not being truthful to ourselves, and we are not being truthful to the world population. UFOs are a reality. They are here.
And for those who continue to insist there is not enough evidence, the United States government and other governments around the world speak for themselves.
Now, these right here are rolls of microfilm. 94 of rolls like this make up Project Blue Book. Most people have never seen what's in these files. What you hear about and what people say about these files, once you get to see them and read them, you then realize there's a whole lot in there that clearly points that even Blue Book had to conclude there was something. Although by regulation, they had to reduce the number of the unknowns. Therefore, possible and probables were being used to identify possible aircraft, probable aircraft, meteors, atmospheric phenomena. At the end of the year, they would then be no longer possible or probable. There are over 700 unknowns within the Blue Book files. Today, people state that if we had more information, we could readily identify those. Well, you had three categories in Blue Book. You had identified, insufficient data, and unknown. If all the data wasn't there that would allude to some type of plausible conclusion being reached, it would be considered an insufficient data case. Those cases that were identified as unknowns had all the data there to which a reasonable conclusion, if there was one, could have been reached. But after careful analysis, none could. These were the cases they couldn't hide. These were the cases that they had no choice but to call unknown. These files right here are part of the administrative files of Project Blue Book. Briefing our congressionals were in an effort to try to get started. Efforts were made to ensure that these congressionals never got off the ground. Assertive efforts behind closed doors. There were briefings that was given. There were documents drawn up to assist in the aid of identifying UFOs. This document clearly shows that certain phenomena could be identified as UFOs from time to time. So it was to eliminate those and then leave you with only the true unknowns. So this document was utilized. There were briefings, there were special reports, the Scientific Advisory Board of the U.S. Air Force, the status reports, Project Stork that eventually led to Special Report 14. All of these documents are important, and the American people should read them. The American people should have access to these documents. Starting over here on my left, we have UFO documents from the FBI and from Department of Defense. These right here are some of the very good FBI documents, for example, in the Project Blue Book files, there are certain documents dealing with Project Twinkle you're not going to find. But they're here. They were in the FBI documents. You find out that with the FBI documents, there was a tremendous amount of concern about UFO sightings over a nuclear facility at Oak Ridge. Things were going on there. You find out that there's cases mentioning FBI radar cases in the FBI files, which the Air Force tried to state wasn't there. You also find out that some documents alluded to there being that or the Air Force, while they were telling the American public that there was nothing to UFOs, high-ranking officials within the Air Force involved in UFO investigations was actually concerned about some UFOs being extraterrestrial spacecraft. These right here are all NSA documents that have been released. These are the 172 pages that they said was so sensitive the American public couldn't see them. To give the illusion that they had been released in their entirety, the stuff that you couldn't see was whited out. Therefore, you don't have the big black marks on the document that makes you ask the question, what is this all about? Remember, all files on Moondust and Blue Fly are not supposed to exist. Yet, here is the State Department Defense Intelligence Agency's documentation on Moondust and Blue Fly, dealing with cases in which we have recovered objects of unknown origin or objects of foreign origin that survived re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. Some of these are very earthly objects that returned. Others are not. Others are objects that to this day, even though they happened in the 60s, have yet to be ascertained as to their origin, or for the U.S. government to acknowledge what they were. They have not been returned to any foreign power as would be required under international law. Therefore, are we violating international law? Are the countries in which we would have recovered objects belonging to them, are they so incompetent that they would not have known that these objects went down and where they went down? I don't think so. UFO sightings in Bolivia, Kuwait, Argentina, another one in Kuwait, France, Colombo, Buenos Aires, Bridgetown, all of these being Moondust documents, making reference in some cases to UFOs, all the way into the 80s. And remember, we ceased having an interest in UFOs December 17th, 1969, with the closure of Blue Book. Really? If that's the case, why do we have these documents? Remember, they're raw data, raw field data. Where is the finalized intelligence product? You don't gather information and not do something with it. Down here, we have Defense Intelligence Agency documents and Department of State documents dealing once again with UFOs and Blue Fly. You'll see that these events have taken place all over the world, in every country. Once again, the question begs to be answered. Where is the finalized intelligence product? What is the government trying to hide? Why do these documents exist when the only agency that was supposed to be investigating UFOs was the Air Force? Well, you've heard my story, and you've seen some of the documentation I have. I suggest that the documentation clearly shows that we are not alone in the universe, that we have visitors from distant solar systems, many light years away, that the technology required to do that we always concluded was impossible, we are now working on. The evidence that isn't supposed to be there clearly is there based upon the abundance of the documentation that has been released. It's just that the other evidence, the hard, finalized intelligence product, those have not surfaced. Gun camera footage that is known to exist and alluded to in the Blue Book files has yet to surface. The photographs and film footage that has been taken after the closure of Blue Book has yet to surface. These are things that we must try to get a hold of and get it out. For those of you who believe that there is nothing to UFOs, let me say this. Today, we are reaching for the stars. Tomorrow, we will achieve the technology to reach those stars. Day after tomorrow, we ourselves will become someone else's unidentified flying objects.
On May 9, 2001, a unique historic event took place at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. More than 20 former military and aerospace employees attended a news conference called by an organization known as the Disclosure Project. Many of the participants at one time held top-secret security clearances and had been charged with some of our country's most sensitive national security secrets. Now they were stepping forward to warn the nation. The topic of the news conference was excessive government secrecy that surrounds a highly controversial topic, UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence. One of those attending was Sergeant Clifford Stone.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Clifford Stone. I was a Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I had a secret clearance with nuclear surety. I could get the clearance that I needed to do whatever it was that was necessary for me to do at the time on special operations when I was called in on those. What I'm referring to here is that I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers, for lack of a better term, debris thereof. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive. While we were doing all this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it. I'd like to go into detail on some of the cases about the nuts and bolts cases right here, but I will be available if you have any questions concerning my involvement in this. You can talk to Dr. Greer to arrange for me to get to talk to you. But the whole situation is we've set back, we've told the American people that there's no such thing as UFOs. I've been involved where we have recovered these objects. We know them to be of extraterrestrials. In 1969, I had an event that happened to me while I was stationed at Fort Lee, Virginia. We went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. That would be my first exposure to any time that we would be recovering an unidentified flying object. When we went there, we already had people that was already in the facility. We were a backup team, which was supposed to be NBC because there was supposed to be some nuclear materials that was on board this craft. Later on, most people involved would have been were to be told that there was nothing on board it. It was nothing more than just a crash of one of our aircraft. I know better because I was one of the people that approached it with a Geiger counter to get surface readings. I was the first person to go ahead and see that there were bodies on it. That would be the first of approximately 12 events. UFO crashes are not events that take place every day. They're rare. I know we're not alone in the universe. I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's evidence that has been denied to the American people. I stand before you today in my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people for no reason. Thank you.